Hello and welcome to the BA Sports Podcast. If you're joining us live on Twitter, YouTube, or Riverside, please give us a follow and subscribe. Tanner, are you ready to go into the Week 6 start, sit, sleepers, and busts at all positions?
Yes,
Week
sir. Let's
7.
get straight into it.
Let's get right into it. So we're going over Week 7's quarterbacks to start, then going into running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, defenses, and kickers, as always. So starting off, my start at the quarterback position is going to be Kirk Cousins. Second week in a row, I've had him. Really wish I listed Caleb Williams on Twitter. I know I talked about him on the podcast. So if you listened, you heard me talk about starting Caleb Williams. But the Seattle defense has been banged up, in which they've allowed three straight quarterbacks in a row to score 26 plus fantasy points. Kirk is at home in a good spot. I think he has a big time game here, and we saw it 2 weeks ago. He only had 14 points against Carolina. I expect him to get back to how he performed against Tampa Bay in week 5. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the quarterback position?
Week 7, I've got Baker Mayfield. I mean, listen, if this guy's name was Patrick Mahomes, I think he'd be getting started every week, no questions asked about it. Like, Baker's been killing it this year. I don't think he's gotten quite the credit he deserves. He's emerged as one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy this year. He's averaging like 22 and a half points per game. I think he needs to be starting without question going forward, especially against the Ravens. We know how often and prone they are to giving up big, explosive chunk plays in the passing game. Baker's been really good at that year, especially with Chris Godwin. The Ravens defense has struggled against quarterbacks. They've given up a total of 11 touchdown passes and the second most fantasy points per game in 2024. Start Baker Mayfield with ease in week 7 and fire him up every week going forward until he shows you something otherwise.
Yeah, I like Baker. He's been going nuts. Him and Godwin have an insane connection to start the year. And I'm looking forward to the game that they're going to have this week. It should be an electric one. Let's move into the sits at the quarterback position. I have Kyler Murray as a sit. You can classify him more as a bust because he is probably going to be started in the majority of leagues, but I'm looking to avoid him unless it is a super flex league. But I'm not even starting him in my super flex league. I'm starting Drake May over him, and we're going to go into Drake May in a little bit. But Kyler could be without Marvin Harrison Jr. We're unsure. It's looking like he may play, but he has a concussion. He's in the protocol, but it is leaning toward he may play. But they do have a Monday night game, so you have to have a backup option in place if you're going to keep Kyler Murray in your starting quarterback slot. The good thing is, I mean, there are 2 Monday night games, so you have a little more options. But if you hear that Marvin Harrison Jr. is indeed out, I would look to replace him on Sunday beforehand. Only 2 quarterbacks have scored more than 15 fantasy points against the Chargers on the year. I had Bo Nix as a sit last week against this Chargers defense. His first half performance was sit worthy, but his second half performance, he kind of revamped himself in the second half, got his stuff together, and scored 20 plus fantasy points. So it ended up not being a great call. He still performed pretty well, but I think Kyler Murray without Marvin Harrison Jr. could struggle in this one against this Chargers defense. Tanner, who do you have as a sit at the quarterback position?
This week I've got Aaron Rodgers. He hasn't scored more than 15.1 points in all but 2 of his first 6 games. This week against the Steelers, I think their offensive line is just going to get dominated by that Steelers pass rush. Pittsburgh defense hasn't allowed any opposing quarterbacks to beat them for more than 16.4 fantasy points in a game this year. And I think only 2 quarterbacks this year against them have thrown for multiple touchdowns in a game against them. So while I do like the Devontae Adams trade for Aaron Rodgers rest of season, I don't necessarily think that he's a start in week 7.
Yeah, I agree. He's got a new shiny toy, but I think that the TJ Watt's going to ruin the reunion, and the Steelers defense should do well. Let's move into sleepers, though, Tanner. And I want to go into your sleeper because I just mentioned him earlier talking about Kyler Murray. So let's hear your sleeper on the week because I full on agree with this call. So
Yes, we're gonna fire up Drake May, the one and only New England Patriots quarterback, the franchise, the future. I'm gonna constantly keep comparing him to Josh Allen because I really think that's what he's gonna be, just more accurate and maybe not quite as physical at the end of his runs as Josh Allen is, but and hopefully a lot better with his ball security. But week 7, he has an amazing matchup. Jaguars might have the worst defense in the league against quarterbacks, so I think he can fire him up with ease. I'm not too worried about his knee injury. He's not seen walking around with any brace on or any limp or anything around Gillette Stadium, around the facilities and whatnot. So he's in London this week. It's the Jags. Fire him up.
Oh, yeah. Fire him up. I had him as one of my sleepers as well. And another sleeper I want to talk about is Andy Dalton, who has scored at least 18 fantasy points in 3 of his 4 starts. And his one bad performance was the performance I told y'all to sit him because the Bears are the best defense against quarterbacks, and he only had 3 points that week. This is a really good matchup against the Commanders, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. And they've allowed 4 quarterbacks to score 20-plus fantasy points. I think Dalton can be a good start in deeper leagues, maybe to fill in a bye if you have him and Caleb Williams, and he's available on waivers. He's a great start, I think, also in the Superflex League. So fire Andy Dalton up as a sleeper, and especially in 2QB Superflex Leagues, I think he's a good call this week, along with Drake May, who I am firing up in a Superflex League. So let's go on to the running back position. Tanner, do you have any other thing to mention about quarterbacks?
I'm really excited about Jordan Love this week. Just in general, he's averaging more than 20 fantasy points in his 4 starts this season. I definitely play him against the Texans. It should be a high-scoring game. Packers are at home. Texans defense has allowed 3 quarterbacks to beat them for more than 19 points through their first 6 games. And it's a list that includes my guy, rookie Drake May, in his first NFL start last week. So I really do like Jordan Love this week. But that's all I've got for that.
Yeah, another quarterback I want to mention because people could be on the fence is Geno Smith. I think that game's going to be a shootout. They have an over-under of 51 points, and they're playing in a controlled environment in Mercedes-Benz in the Dome in Atlanta. So Kirk is my start, but I'd also throw Geno out there as a start. But let's move into the running backs now.
I think I've got 1 or 2 more if I can, because speaking of quarterbacks on the fence, Sam Darnold. Yeah, Brady, I know you even have a league where that's a decision that you're muling. I mean, he's been solid this year. Mm-hmm. He's 19-plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. He gets the Lions. Excuse me. Vegas opened this game with a total of 51. So if Vegas thinks it's going to be high scoring, they're usually right. Now, I know the Lions just held Dak to 3.2 points last week, but I mean, was that really the Lions defense or is that really just the Cowboys? Let's be honest.
As the Cowboys offense.
Detroit's also given up 18-plus points to 2 quarterbacks since week 2 and will be without Aiden Hutchinson. So fire up Sam Darnold, and that same could be said about Jared Goff in regards to I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. He's been hot, though. I mean, 25 points or more in his last 2 games, thrown for multiple touchdowns without any interceptions in each of his last 3 games. And I'd start him in what figures to be a shootout in Minnesota. I know the Vikings defense has been pretty tough on opposing quarterbacks, but I'm going to go with the upside and what could be a shootout.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the game could be a shootout. I am starting Sam Darnold in that league, so hoping he does well. At the running back position, my start is going to be Brian Robinson Jr. coming off injury. Hope he's good to go. If he is good to go, the Panthers have been one of the worst run defenses in the league. We saw Bijan get right last week against them. And I think Brian Robinson Jr. gets back to his old self here after dealing with the injury. He missed last week, but I expect him to do really well this week against the Panthers. I think they're going to keep it on the ground, try and control the clock. Jaden Daniels was excited to hear that he may be back, so that is another weapon for Jaden Daniels along with Terry McLaurin. So they've formed a good connection over the past couple weeks. This Commanders offense has been looking a lot better. So I am very comfortable with firing up Brian Robinson Jr. because Carolina has allowed 6 running backs in the past 3 games to score 14-plus PPR points, which, in my opinion, you gotta start him. Tanner, who do you have as a start at the running back position?
Yeah, again, on that Panthers defense, they've surrendered the most fantasy points to running backs, and 4 running backs have beat them for more than 16 points. I mean, even if B-Rob doesn't go, which at this point in time we think he's going to go, Alston Eckler could be a flex option for fantasy managers. At the running back position for start this week, I love Tony Pollard against the Bills. The Bills couldn't stop a nosebleed. They're so bad against the run. And Pollard's been really good this year. He's scored 15-plus points in 4 of his first 5 games. He's got a great matchup this week. Like I said, Bills have allowed the second most points to running backs this year, and that includes 5 backs who have finished with more than 19 points. And 2 of those backs have scored 29 or more. So fire up Tony Pollard. I think he's RB1 territory this week.
Yeah, I like Pollard this week. I think they can even pass him the ball. I mean, the Bills' defense against running backs has looked pretty bad, as we saw Breece Hall go nuts. Let's move into sits and keeping it in the same game, actually. You know, Ray Davis had a great game last week, but I know a lot of people may have picked him up this week, but this is a very bad matchup for him. The Titans defense has stifled the running backs like Breece Hall, DeAndre Swift, Devon Achane, and Josh Jacobs already this year. So it's very concerning if you're thinking of starting Ray Davis in place of James Cook. If James Cook does go, I will have him on full-on bust alert against the Titans for sure, because no running back has topped 62 rushing yards this year. And all those guys I just mentioned, none of them have gone over 62 rushing yards. You know, we did see him 97 yards last week in Ray Davis, but I don't expect the same from him this week. And if James Cook goes, I'm putting him on bus alert. So avoid the Bills' backfield this week. The only Bill I think I'd want to start is Josh Allen and maybe Amari Cooper. But other than that, it's and the Bills' defense. But other than that, it's a bad matchup against this Titans front, who's really keeping them in games because Will Levis has not been performing well. Tanner, who do you like as a sit this week at the running back position?
I liked him before the draft, or excuse me, I disliked him before the draft, and I dislike him even more now. It's James Conner. I understand he's tough to sit, but his fantasy points have been declining in 3 straight games, including last week where he had only 6.6 points against the Chargers. Or excuse me, last week. And the Chargers have been really good on running backs this year, allowing only 1 rushing touchdown and the 6th fewest points per game to the position. James Conner's 29. We've already seen 1 quarterback in his age group. Aaron Jones already missed time due to an injury. I think it's only a matter of time until Conner gets hurt. You should be looking to sell him if you own him. If you can't trade him, then maybe look at rostering Trey Benson. I do really like the Cardinals' playoff schedule, especially weeks 15 through 17. Just my thoughts on James Conner.
Yeah, I agree. I can see him struggling this week if he does go. And let's move on to the sleeper at the running back position. My sleeper is going to be Tyler Goodson of the Indianapolis Colts if Jonathan Taylor does not go. If he goes, I don't know how much of an impact Tyler Goodson will actually have. But if Jonathan Taylor is out and you need a replacement and someone already has Trey Sermon, I like Tyler Goodson because Miami's run defense is really, really bad. And Goodson looked pretty good last week. If Taylor's out again, I like him a lot. And the Dolphins allow the third most fantasy points to running backs, which, in my opinion, fire him up, fire Trey Sermon up. I could see Goodson maybe out touching Sermon. Goodson looked the more explosive back. He had 51 yards rushing and 14 yards receiving on 5 targets. And he's got 7 catches in 2 games without Jonathan Taylor, which is good for PPR value. If Sermon and Taylor are both out, because Sermon could be out as well, then I think Tyler Goodson is a low-end RB2 in all leagues. So fire him up if those guys are both out. But if they both end up playing or one of them ends up playing, he's still going to split time. So I'd downgrade him to kind of a boom-bust flex play. But he looked the more explosive back, so I like him. Tanner, who do you have at the running back position for a sleeper?
Yeah, a couple more guys that I think could see a significant boost in volume due to injuries. Tank Bigsby, first and foremost. I mean, he's simply been the best running back in Jacksonville this year. I mean, Travis Etienne's been cursed with not only bad luck with injuries, but also efficiency and effectiveness. I mean, he's been terrible, and he's dealing with the injured hamstring.
It seems like we lost Tanner, y'all, so we're going to keep this rolling. It looks like he disconnected, but keeping at the running back position, I've got the bust at the running back position this week. It's going to be Jordan Mason. Kansas City is the number 1 defense versus running backs. They allow the fewest fantasy points to running backs. It'll be hard to sit Mason if he does, in fact, play, because I know also people have probably picked up Isaac Garendo. But if Jordan Mason does, in fact, go, I would not start him. I would try and go elsewhere. I know it's hard. The running back position is very slim, but like I just mentioned, Tyler Goodson could be out there for you. He could be a good replacement if Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon are out. Like I mentioned, at the RB2 position, he's a solid RB2 that could replace Jordan Mason. So I'm fine with starting Tyler Goodson over Jordan Mason as an RB2 if you have the depth or want to make that risky play. But in my opinion, for me to do that, you have to have those other 2 guys out in Indianapolis. So the volume goes fully on Goodson as the lead back in that offense because he's looked good. But that's going to be it for the running back position. Start, sit, sleepers, bust. We're going to move into the wide receiver position now. Hopefully Tanner comes back on here. But if not, we're going to keep it rolling. Start at the wide receiver position. I've got Deontay Johnson and Jameson Williams. I'm going to go into Deontay Johnson first. Deontay Johnson, in 4 games, he has seen Andy Dalton look his way 43 times. 43 targets in 4 games under Andy Dalton as his quarterback. And the Commanders have allowed the 5th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. I think this is a good matchup in which the Panthers are probably going to be trailing. So even in daily fantasy, Deontay Johnson could be a sneaky play if you want to start Brian Robinson Jr. at your running back in daily fantasy and then throw in Deontay Johnson as the wide receiver because they're going to be trailing. Game script is going to favor the Panthers throwing the ball. And this Commanders defense, they've stepped it up somewhat in the last couple of weeks, but Lamar Jackson, the Ravens offense, tore them up. I think that the Panthers are going to do all right. They're not going to be the Ravens. I think the Commanders end up getting a win here, but I think they're going to pass enough to get Deontay Johnson enough volume. As we've seen over the last 4 games, he's drew 43 targets, so volume's there. I think Deontay Johnson has a good game in PPR leagues. Jameson Williams is my other start at the wide receiver position because the Vikings defense has been very good. However, they haven't been good against wide receivers. They've given up the most points to wideouts. If Williams can see more targets, I expect he can do even better for you because he's only seen 6 targets in his last 2 games, but he's been very efficient in scoring 33 fantasy points total over the last 2 games. So only 6 catches, but he's got about 33 fantasy points to show for those 6 catches. So I like Jameson Williams once again in a game I think can be high scoring, and I like both quarterbacks in this one. That's a good game. And then sits at the wide receiver position, Calvin Ridley. I wish he would have done better. Last week he saw 8 targets, but Will Levis just is not a quarterback that helps Ridley out in this. He's just been so bad, and the Bills' defense, their weakness is the ground game against the running backs. So, which is why Tanner mentioned Tony Pollard. He has a great matchup against this Bills defense, but we saw Aaron Rodgers struggle against this Bills defense last week. I expect Will Levis to struggle yet again. Hopefully, he can get Calvin Ridley the ball, but I don't think I want to risk it. I think the Titans are going to try and play their game of keeping it on the ground, even though they're going to be without one of their better running backs, the backup Tajay Spears. Another sit. This is just having to do with the situation, and I think that the Dolphins are going to go full on run game here, and maybe they send Waddle and Tyreek on some jet sweeps, but I think they lean on Achane, who's looking to come back from his concussion. He had the bye last week. He's practiced in full the past 2 days. I expect him to clear concussion protocol. Raheem Mostert is going to also be back. He looked decent. They also have the rookie Jalen Wright. So 3 running backs for the Dolphins, all of which I think can do really well against this defense, who not good against the run. The Colts defense has struggled against the run, but without Tua, it's hard for me to start Jalen Waddle. So I am having him as my second sit until Tua is back. Then maybe we can see Waddle produce. I'm fine with starting Tyreek Hill, but Jalen Waddle is a sit for me. A sleeper at the wide receiver position, I've got 2 more of them. I've actually got 3 of them. I'll go into my first one, Jackson Smith and Jigba. This game might be a shootout. As I was talking about, I like Geno Smith. I like Kirk Cousins. He's seen 7 targets in 3 straight games, so I expect the volume to be there in this shootout, which could be very good in this matchup. And he's a wide receiver 3 flex play for me. Jackson Smith and Jigba, I think if he gets in the end zone, he will produce that wide receiver 3 flex value for you, especially with him seeing 7 targets. And another sleeper, Demario Douglas. We mentioned the Jags defense are very bad, and May likes Demario Douglas, as we saw last week against the Texans. I expect him to have another great game against this Jags defense. As we saw Caleb Williams light him up. You know, DJ Moore didn't do well, but Keenan Allen did well. Cole Kmet did well. So receivers do well. As we saw also the week before, the Colts tore him up. Josh Downs, Alec Pierce got in the end zone. I think Demario Douglas is in a good spot if you need to start him as a wide receiver 3 flex play. And another one, Christian Watson. I think, he came back last week a little earlier than people anticipated, but I do like him in this matchup against the Texans defense, who have been banged up. And I think Jordan Love is going to try and get Christian Watson the ball. So he's a solid wide receiver 3 flex play for me. And let's go into some busts at the wide receiver position. Michael Pittman Jr. and Brandon Ayuk. Michael Pittman Jr., Anthony Richardson is back. I think this helps Josh Downs a little more. Joe Flacco was looking Michael Pittman Jr.'s way a little bit more than Anthony Richardson was. I also expect the Colts to lean on the run game. Now, if they're without Jonathan Taylor and Trey Sermon, so it's just Tyler Goodson, maybe they use Anthony Richardson in the run game, but I also think they dial up some plays for Alec Pierce deep shots, some Josh Down deep shots. It's going to be tough for me to start Michael Pittman Jr. in this one. I think he's going to have Jalen Ramsey on him, so we'll see what the Dolphins defense does to match up with this Colts offense, but I am trying to avoid Michael Pittman if I can. And then Brandon Ayuk. The Chiefs defense is very, very good against wide receivers. They might be one of the more underrated defenses in the league. I think that's why they're undefeated, really, is because of their defense. Mahomes hasn't been performing well, but their defense has been performing lights out. So I'm trying to avoid Brandon Ayuk this week if you can, but I understand two teams on bye this week, the Bears and the Cowboys. So if you cannot avoid him, well, then you're just going to have to stick with him and play him. But let's move into the tight end position. Going to go into starts, sits, sleepers, and butts at the tight end position. As always, if you're not following on Twitter, follow me at BA Sports Podcast. Follow on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube. That'd be much appreciated. You can also hop in the chat on YouTube, and I can see it on here. I don't think I can see the Twitter chat. It's at BA Sports Podcast, trying to grow the YouTube audience, so that'd be much appreciated. I'm going to drop my full weekly matchup analysis on Saturday morning, maybe Saturday midday, but let's move into the tight end position. Starts at sleepers and busts. Start at the tight end position is going to be Evan Ingram. The Patriots defense has allowed 3 tight ends to score 11 plus PPR fantasy points in their last 4 games. Last week, Evan Ingram had 10 catches for 102 yards on 10 targets, so he caught all 10 of his targets for over 100 yards, and he did lose a fumble, which not great, but I think this matchup favors him a lot more than the one last week against the Bears. The Bears defense is much better than this Patriots defense. So I would fire up Evan Ingram. I know some people dropped him out there and some people were able to pick him up before last week. If you did, good job and congrats on that one, because him and Brian Thomas Jr., I think, are going to be the 2 wide receivers Trevor Lawrence leans on in this game. Another tight end I like is Kyle Pitts. Short week. I know you're going to be missing Jake Ferguson and Cole Kmet. So if you have Kyle Pitts, that's me in one of my leagues. I was able to have Kyle Pitts, and also I was able to hey, thanks, Locks. And I was also able to have Jake Ferguson. So Jake Ferguson and Kyle Pitts were my decision last week. I went with Jake Ferguson, and that was a bad decision. But I'm starting Kyle Pitts this week, so I encourage you to do the same if you have those two, because Jake Ferguson is on bye. A sit at the tight end position, Tyler Conklin. New weapons for Aaron Rodgers, mainly one new weapon in Devontae Adams. He might be the odd man out. Tyler Conklin might, so I would avoid him if you can, because I expect Aaron Rodgers to try and throw it to Devontae, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, even Alan Lazard. Like Tyler Conklin may be the 4th or 5th option in this offense, so I'm looking to sit him this week if you can. A sleeper at the tight end position is going to be Dalton Schultz, because no Nico Collins yet again. So Schultz should do well in Nico's absence, because as we saw last week, the Packers struggled to stop Trey McBride the week prior. Colby Parkinson had quite a decent performance. I think he got double digits. You'll take that at the tight end position. I think Dalton Schultz could get you easily double digits this week. If he is sitting out there on waivers, look to pick him up, because I think the Texans will be trailing and passing in this one. This one could turn into a sneaky shootout with the Texans defense banged up. Depending on how this Packers defense performs against this Houston offense. I know they don't have Nico, but they still have Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, and Dalton Schultz, not to mention Joe Mixon. I mean, so definitely fire up Dalton Schultz this week. And a bust at the tight end position is going to be Dalton Kincaid. Number 1 in least fantasy points allowed to tight ends are the Tennessee Titans. Amari Cooper also enters this offense, so this could lead to a decrease in targets for Dalton Kincaid. Look to avoid if you can, because this position has been rough. So I know if you can't avoid sitting Kincaid, you're going to have to fire him up and start him. Hopefully he gets in the end zone. But tight ends have not been doing well, so I don't, it doesn't matter that much. I think you can risk starting him. So let's move into some defenses and kickers. I really like my sleeper defense this week, and I might pick them up myself. The Bills defense is my start of the week. The Will Levis show in Tennessee is so bad, and I think the Bills can take full-on advantage. I mean, they took advantage of Aaron Rodgers last week, so I expect them to do the same against Will Levis. Now, they got to figure out how to stop Tony Pollard, but this is bad. Yeah, oh, thank you, Jack. On the YouTube chat, Bowers was getting mentioned as performing well as a tight end. Yeah, he's clearly the number 1 tight end this week. Don't think there's any question about that. He's probably the most consistent tight end. If you were able to get him in drafts, he was the steal of the draft at the tight end position because he was going so late. So good job, Jack, by you on getting Bowers late in that draft. Bowers has been a stud. Let's move into the sits of the defense position. Texans defense, injuries are plaguing this defense. I'm not looking to start them against the high-powered Green Bay offense. So definitely avoid the Texans defense this week. I mean, Drake May just did pretty well against this Texans defense. So I'm kind of afraid of Jordan Love doing the same, even worse. I think Jordan Love can destroy this Texans defense. So I would avoid if you can. And then my sleeper at the defense position, this one I really like this week. The Rams coming off a bye could be a sneaky play here at home. Vegas may be without Jacoby Myers. They just traded away Devontae Adams. It's also going to be Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, and I don't really trust him. But I'm starting Brock Bowers anyways. I'm straight up starting Brock Bowers because he's the only person on this Raiders offense I expect to do well. But the Rams, coming off a bye at home under the McVay era, are 2-1 at home after a bye. The defense has played well after a bye, allowing 17 points or fewer in 5 of 7 games under Sean McVay. Packers and Niners in 2021 and 2022 are the only two teams who have scored more than 17 points on the Rams after a bye. So after a bye, the Rams defense usually, I guess they figure it out and get it together. So I would fire them up this week if you need a sneaky play at the defense position, defense special teams position. I like them a lot. And then a bust at the defense position. I'm going to go with the Niners. The Niners defense, Mahomes, I think coming off a bye is scary, and I don't want to start him or start the Niners defense. So definitely avoid the Niners defense if you can. But I mean, they've been one of the better performing defenses, and they're a defense that could get you a pick six any week. So if you have to start them, fire them up. But there may be better options out there in your leagues. I would definitely take the Bills over the Niners. Let's go into some kickers really quick. A guy I called out last week as a start was Chris Boswell, and he went off against Vegas. The other kicker going against Vegas this week is Josh Carty. I expect him to be available in the majority of leagues out there, and Vegas is the worst defense against kickers. Kickers score the most points on Vegas, so if Carty's out there and you need a fill-in for, say, Brandon Aubrey, Cairo Santos this week, Carty, go get Carty. Another kicker I like is Jason Myers at Atlanta. They also are very bad against kickers. Actually, they're the worst against kickers. They allow the most points. Vegas allows the second most points. And Jason Myers has performed as a top 10 kicker this year. So fire him up. I expect this game to be high scoring. As I said, the over-under is 51 points in this game. Some other kickers I like, Cameron Dicker against Arizona. The Arizona defense hasn't looked great, and they still could allow the Chargers to stall out in the red zone, which is why Cameron Dicker could score. And they're in Arizona, so they're playing in the controlled dome environment. All these kickers I just mentioned, and Carty, Myers, and Dicker are all in the controlled dome environment, which is great. And then a kicker I'd like to avoid this week is Jake Bates. I expect the Lions to score some points, but I think they may be scoring touchdowns rather than field goals. And Minnesota allows the least amount of points to opposing kickers. Granted, Bates had a great game last week against the Cowboys, but I think it's going to be tough to trust Bates this week. Even though I think they're going to score a lot of points, the Vikings defense has only allowed 7 field goal attempts on the season. So they're just allowing either a lot more touchdowns or not allowing teams to get field goal attempts, and they're just stopping them because this Vikings defense has been stifling. But that's going to be it for the kicker position. So that's going to do it for the start, sit, sleepers, and busts at all positions. We've gone over the quarterback position, the running back position, wide receivers, tight ends, defenses, and kickers. I'm going to post my full weekly matchup analysis on Saturday morning, so make sure to follow me at BA Sports Podcast on Twitter or the X, and subscribe on YouTube, and you can rewatch this if you caught it in the middle, caught it in the end. The podcast episode is going to be out tomorrow, Friday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So look out for that on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, wherever you listen to podcasts. I appreciate you all listening to this episode of the BA Sports Podcast. Week 7 preview starts at Sleepers and Bust. Let's have a great week and get you the dub. I'll catch you guys live next Thursday, or if you're listening not live, every Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. It's going to be out on all podcast platforms. I appreciate you all listening, and have a great rest of your weekend. See ya.